It was a hot summer afternoon in Missouri, and the kitchen in Kelly's house was stifling. The clock on the wall ticked incessantly, as if counting down to the inevitable. The table, positioned in front of the window, was set with a plate that would become the stage for yet another battle between mother and daughter. 10-year-old Sarah stared at the food with swollen eyes, filled with anger and exhaustion. There it was again. The rice, the undercooked meat, and the massive portion of broccoli her mother insisted on forcing down her throat. "Eat, Sarah. You're not going to let it get cold, are you?" Kelly spoke with the calm of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. It wasn't just about the food. It was a power game, a matter of control, and for Kelly, discipline. She wholeheartedly believed she was doing what was best for her daughter. She couldn't understand why Sarah refused to eat, as if the plate were a punishment rather than a blessing. "I don't like it. I don't want it." Sarah was already in tears, but Kelly wouldn't relent. "You will eat. You're not leaving this table until you finish it all." Even if it takes until dinner, Kelly's words came with a firmness that left no room for argument. Sarah's hand trembled slightly as she picked up her fork. But she didn't take a single bite. Her stomach hurt, her throat tightened, but she couldn't stop. She couldn't give in. "But Mom," Sarah tried again, her voice barely a whisper. "I can't. Can't? It's not about can't. It's about doing what's right." Kelly didn't lift her eyes from her plate. "This plate will be your lesson today, young lady." The temperature in the kitchen seemed to rise, but the heat Sarah felt wasn't just from the oven. It was a heat born of despair, a burning sensation that choked her and made her want to scream. She thought about how her mother always forced her into things. She thought about the endless hours spent trying to please that woman. It wasn't just the rice and broccoli. It was everything. The hours of homework, the chores, the constant demand for perfection. Nothing was ever enough. "You're going to eat every last bite, Sarah," Kelly insisted, her piercing gaze fixed on her daughter. But Sarah didn't want to. She couldn't. Not like this. In her mind, the plate in front of her became the symbol of everything she hated. It was more than just food. It was the reflection of a life where she had no voice, where her desires were ignored, where her pain didn't matter. In that moment, something inside Sarah broke. She looked at the plate, at her mother, and made a silent promise. A promise that one day, she would do the same. When her mother grew old and weak, she would do the same. Sarah pressed her lips together and, without another word, pushed the plate away. "I won't eat." Her voice was firmer than she expected. Almost a threat. Kelly looked at her daughter, her eyes hardening. "You don't have a choice." But Sarah wasn't afraid. She already knew that one day, she would have the power to give back everything she had endured. Sarah stood up from her chair, her legs trembling. Her mind was full of thoughts she could barely process. She was no longer a child, not in the way her mother saw her. She had already grown, had her own opinions, her own pain, her own internal battles, but all Kelly saw was a spoiled girl who didn't know what was good for her. Sarah looked out the window at the cloudy sky outside, as if it were the only place where she could breathe. "Are you going to stand there all day, or are you going to eat like a decent person?" Kelly was becoming impatient now, her motherly patience giving way to a coldness Sarah knew well. "I'm not hungry," Sarah said, almost a whisper, but the words were spoken with force. She felt the muscles in her jaw tighten. She wasn't just tired, she was tired of being pushed, of being disregarded, of being just a pawn in a war she hadn't asked to join. "Yes, you are. Now eat." "Because I'm the one in charge here," Kelly grumbled, her voice growing harsher. "What do you think you're doing, challenging me in my own house?" Sarah took a deep breath. The smell of the food was almost unbearable, but it wasn't just the smell of the plate that made her want to leave. It was the smell of frustration, of disappointment, of a life of imposed silence. Her silence, her lack of choice, all of it condensed into this moment. She thought about school, where no one seemed to understand the weight she carried at home. She thought about her friends, who had fun while she was trapped in this unbearable routine. All she wanted was to be treated like a person, not a piece of property or a burden. But no, her mother didn't care about that. For Kelly, it was simple. Either Sarah ate or she faced the consequences. What Sarah didn't know was that her mother had built a prison for both of them. A prison where Sarah was learning to silently rebel without realizing it. There's nothing more to discuss. You'll eat, and then you'll go to your room, Kelly said, anger etched on her face. But Sarah didn't move. She looked at her mother, her heart pounding faster. How could she go on? How could she endure this? Then, without thinking, she did something unexpected. With unexpected strength, Sarah pushed her chair back, sending it crashing to the floor. The plate, carefully balanced on the table, slid off and fell beside her, shattering on the floor. "What did you do?" Kelly screamed, jumping up. Her eyes widened in surprise, and fury quickly took over her face. "You're challenging me now? I raised you, gave you everything you have." Sarah stood there, staring at the broken plate on the floor, her heart pounding uncontrollably. But somewhere inside her, a sense of liberation began to grow. It was as if the weight of her entire life was being lifted away. "I won't obey anymore," Sarah said with a firmness she had never used before. "I won't do what you want. No matter how hard you try to control me, I won't be who you want me to be." Kelly glared at her, anger overtaking her body, but Sarah noticed something that scared her even more. She saw a weakness in her mother, a vulnerability hidden beneath the facade of authority. Kelly no longer knew how to handle this, how to deal with a daughter who didn't fit into the rules she had created. "You think you can win against me? You think you can do whatever you want?" Kelly hissed, her words dripping with venom. Sarah didn't answer. She grabbed her backpack and, with her heart racing, headed for the door. It was time to leave, to breathe, to escape the cycle of suffering that seemed to repeat every day. What she didn't know was that by taking this step, she wasn't just leaving the house. She was also beginning a journey that would take years to unfold. A journey where, one day, the plate of food she had despised so much would become the centerpiece of a silent revenge. "Sarah, where are you going?" Kelly shouted, but the door slammed shut behind her. Sarah walked down the street, feeling the wind on her face, freedom brushing against her skin. In that moment, she didn't know exactly what she would do, but she knew something inside her had changed forever. She was no longer the scared little girl, the submissive daughter. She had power now, and that power was beginning to grow inside her, like a plant finally ready to bloom. Meanwhile, Kelly, although furious with Sarah's attitude, was living her own chaos. Alone in her house, she tried to hide her failure, her fear of losing control, but she felt the pain of a loss she couldn't comprehend. She couldn't stop thinking about Sarah. What would her daughter do? Why had she done that? Kelly's anger was blind, but there was also a fragment of something else there. Something she preferred not to confront. She thought about all the times she had forced Sarah to eat when she didn't want to. It had been a constant battle, where food was the weapon and control her victory. It didn't matter if Sarah was sick, tired, or simply not hungry. She had to eat, period. Kelly told herself it was out of love, but what lay behind that love was much darker. Kelly went to the kitchen, where the silence felt heavier than ever. The pots gleamed under the afternoon light, but there was no longer the warmth of a shared meal. The smell of food no longer seemed welcoming. Instead, it was a reminder of the coldness with which she had treated her daughter, a torment Kelly didn't know how to handle. She grabbed a plate and, without thinking much, put a portion of rice and beans on the table. There was no one there to eat it, but she still felt the need to prepare something. As if food could fill the void she felt inside. She didn't know how to go back, how to fix the relationship she had destroyed. All she was left with was the weight of guilt, squeezing her with every breath. Meanwhile, Sarah was trying to rebuild herself in a world where she no longer had to obey anyone. The problem was that freedom didn't come without its own challenges. She found herself thinking about Kelly, wondering if her mother felt any regret or the emptiness that Sarah herself felt. The truth was, Sarah didn't know what she wanted. She wanted revenge but didn't know how to achieve it without losing herself in the process. She wanted her mother to feel the same pain she had endured, but she didn't want to become like her. At school, Sarah became quieter not because she wanted to, but because everything seemed insignificant compared to the mountain she still carried within herself. Maya encouraged her to talk about what had happened. But Sarah shut down, refusing to relive those moments. She knew a turning point was coming. Something inside her said her relationship with Kelly wasn't over yet. There was something else in the air, something Sarah couldn't understand yet. And then, on an ordinary night, weeks after the big confrontation, Sarah's phone rang. She hesitated for a moment before answering. It was Kelly. "You're avoiding me, Sarah." Her mother's voice was calmer but still carried an underlying tension. "I'm not avoiding you. I just don't know what to say," Sarah replied, her voice firmer than she expected. "I know you're hurt, but I need you to know, I didn't mean to hurt you. I only wanted the best for you," Kelly said, and for the first time, Sarah heard a tone of vulnerability in her mother's voice. It was strange but didn't make her feel pity, not yet. Sarah remained silent for a moment. She didn't know what to say. Did her mother truly regret it? Could she go back home? Or was it already beyond reconciliation? "I don't know, Mom. I don't know." Sarah's voice trembled, but she wouldn't give in, not now. The conversation ended in a stalemate, but Sarah knew that call would change everything. She could no longer ignore her mother's pain. But she also knew she couldn't go back. No matter how much she tried to convince herself otherwise, Sarah knew deep down that a part of her mind was already preparing for something more, something that might surprise her as much as it would surprise Kelly. The night was silent, but the weight Sarah felt was deafening. She couldn't stop thinking about Kelly. Their recent conversation hadn't brought her the relief she had hoped for. In fact, it seemed to have only deepened the confusion in her heart. What should she do? Confront Kelly with everything she had bottled up? Or simply move on and live her life without further contact? But despite trying to push the thoughts away, something inside Sarah insisted she should go back. The painful truth wouldn't leave her alone. Sarah could no longer ignore what was happening or what her mother had done. Throughout her life, Kelly had tried to control every part of her existence. Even food was a tool, a way to keep Sarah under her influence. And now Sarah realized that the problem wasn't just the food. It was the control, the dominance, the inability to breathe without Kelly's permission. Wide awake that night, tears dried on her face, Sarah's phone rang again. She looked at the display, seeing Kelly's name. Once more, she hesitated, but now something was different. The feeling of rebellion was fading, replaced by a desire for understanding or perhaps just the need to close this cycle of pain. She answered, "Sarah, I know you're angry, and you have every right to be. I did things I can't explain anymore. I can't undo them, but you have to hear me. I need you to understand me," Kelly said, her voice trembling now, with a fragility Sarah had never imagined hearing. Sarah took a deep breath, feeling anger and sadness mixing in her chest. "I don't know if I can understand you, Mom. You always tried to control me, even what I ate, how I dressed, what I did. I never had a choice. I know. And I deeply regret all of that. But you don't understand, Sarah. I did it because I didn't know what else to do. I was so lost back then, and I was terrified of losing you. I thought that if I could control you, I wouldn't lose the only person who gave me any reason to keep going," Kelly confessed. And Sarah could hear the sound of tears in her voice. For a moment, Sarah stayed silent. Her mother's words weren't those of a villain but of a woman haunted by her own choices. Kelly wasn't just apologizing. She was trying to justify everything she had done. But it didn't change the fact that Sarah had been a victim of absolute control, of silent but constant manipulation. Sarah felt a deep ache not for Kelly, but for herself, for all the times her stomach turned, for all the times she was forced to swallow not just food but the lies and expectations her mother had imposed. Now, What should she do? She wanted revenge, but what did that even mean? Revenge didn't bring relief, it never did. Mom, you're telling me all this now, but what's changed? Why are you only saying this now, after so much time? Sarah asked, her voice low but firm. Kelly was silent for a moment, as if searching for the right words. I didn't know how to act anymore. I saw you pulling away, and I lost control, Sarah. I didn't know how to reach out to you without seeming intrusive, obsessive. I didn't want you to leave, but I didn't know how to hold on. Sarah felt a wave of compassion, but also anger. The truth was clear now. Kelly hadn't just lost control over Sarah. She had lost control over her own life, over her own choices, and maybe, deep down, she knew that to regain control, she had to make Sarah suffer. But now, as the cycle seemed to repeat, all that remained was mutual pain, impossible to ignore. And then, in the silence, Sarah understood. She didn't need revenge. Revenge would only perpetuate the cycle of pain and suffering. What she needed, what they both needed, was freedom. Freedom from each other, from everything that had held them captive for so long. And maybe, through that, there could be some kind of healing, not for what had already happened, but for what was yet to come. With her decision made, Sarah looked to the future differently, not with anger, not with hatred, but with the clear awareness that to move forward, she would need to face the pain and scars left by her mother. And maybe, just maybe, they could find a way to start over. But the doubt persisted. Was Kelly truly ready to change? Was she truly remorseful, or did she only regret what her daughter had become? Their future was uncertain terrain, and Sarah knew she couldn't blindly trust her mother's words. But what else did she have to lose? I know I can't erase the past, but please, try to understand that I never meant to hurt you. I only wanted to protect you. Sarah sat on the bed, her body tense. What she was hearing sounded so genuine, so full of regret, but it didn't change the fact that all she had ever wanted was freedom. Protect me? You suffocated me, Mom. I felt swallowed up by you, no choice, no voice. I loved you so much, Kelly replied, her voice trembling with pain. I still do. Sarah, I've always loved you, but I didn't know how to express it anymore. I didn't know how to be the mother you needed, but Sarah no longer knew what that meant. The concept of love Kelly tried to defend was clouded by manipulation and control. It was hard for Sarah to accept that, despite everything. Kelly was also dealing with her own insecurities. It was hard to understand that the mother who controlled her so firmly didn't know how to handle her own weaknesses. Sarah rose from the bed and walked to the window. The night was clear, the moonlight illuminating the quiet streets of the city. How she wished things were different. How she wished that instead of fear and pain, there was understanding, acceptance, and freedom. But as she gazed at the landscape, something dawned on her. She could no longer live in the past or define her life by the choices Kelly had made. She had the right to choose her own path, free from the shadow of control. You never let me make my own choices, Mom, Sarah said, her voice softer now but still heavy with a weight she could barely bear. I never got to decide what was best for me, and now, I'm trying to figure out what that even means. Kelly seemed to absorb every word as if she was trying to adjust to this new understanding her daughter was creating for herself. But Sarah knew that for there to be any kind of healing, she needed to first grasp one thing. Revenge would not set her free. Revenge, tempting as it was, would only perpetuate the cycle of pain. I know I made you suffer, Sarah. I can't change that, but I can try to be different. I don't know if it's enough. But I'm trying. Sarah felt something shift inside her, a silent release. The hatred, the anger, the thirst for revenge began to diminish, step by step. She needed to let it go, to release the weight of decades of suffering, and maybe, by freeing her mother from her burden, she could free herself as well. Perhaps the true victory wasn't in destroying Kelly but in forgiving her, as hard as it seemed. For a moment, a profound silence hung between them. The tension that had once filled the space seemed to ease, as if something had been broken. Sarah felt a growing lightness, as though a heavy part of her being was being lifted. No, she couldn't erase the scars, but she could learn to live with them, to transform them in some way. She could move forward, freeing herself from the need for revenge. Mom, I don't know what's going to happen with us, but I need you to understand that I need space. I need to live my life without your pressure. I need to be myself without your expectations crushing me. Kelly's voice was softer now, with a tone of acceptance Sarah hadn't imagined hearing. I understand, sweetheart. I do. I don't know if I can fully forgive you, but I'll try. That doesn't mean everything is okay, but it's a start. With those words, the call finally ended. Sarah felt a strange sense of relief. It wasn't complete peace, but it was something. It was liberation. She knew there was still much ahead, much to resolve, but now there was a new perspective. She didn't need to carry the weight of guilt or pain anymore. She was finally in control of her own life. Still, as Sarah tried to process all of this, a new question lingered in her mind. Had Kelly really changed, or was she just saying what Sarah wanted to hear to regain control? That doubt, though troubling, didn't stop her from taking the first step toward forgiveness. She was freeing herself, but there was still a long road ahead. And only time would tell if Sarah's forgiveness would truly come to fruition. Sarah didn't know what to expect when she called her mother the next day. Something inside her told her the conversation wouldn't be easy, but at the same time, she felt a faint hope that they could begin rebuilding their relationship. Even if in a different way, something had changed within her, and maybe, just maybe, Kelly was ready to walk a new path too. The phone rang several times before Kelly answered, and when Sarah finally heard her voice on the other end, she noticed a softness there she had never heard before. It was as if Sarah's words from the previous night had made Kelly reflect on her actions. There was regret, yes, but also something more, a sense of acceptance. "Hi, Mom," Sarah said, her voice almost hesitant but firm. She still didn't know exactly what to say but didn't want to hide behind her pain anymore. "Hi, sweetheart," Kelly replied, her voice low but warm. I've thought a lot about what you said. It wasn't easy, but I know you're right." Sarah felt a lump in her throat. Her mother's words touched her in a different way now, as if there was finally a genuine opening for healing. That it wasn't easy felt like the beginning of a true transformation, but at the same time, she knew it wouldn't be simple. "I've been thinking a lot too, Mom," Sarah continued, "and I think if we really want to move forward, we need to start from scratch. I need time, but I want to try." Kelly was silent for a moment, and Sarah almost felt as if her mother was searching for the right words to respond. "I know, Sarah. And I understand. You have every right to need time. I just want you to know I'm here for whatever you need." It was strange to hear those words, so different from anything Sarah had ever heard before. There was no pressure, no rush, but at the same time, Sarah felt the weight of it, as if starting over was an immense responsibility after so many years of pain and repression. As much as Kelly's understanding was a positive step, Sarah couldn't help but question, would it be enough? Could the damage caused over so much time be undone? The idea of forgiveness still seemed so distant, but what she knew clearly was that for any kind of reconciliation to happen, it would be necessary to move forward. No more victimhood, no more resentment. Sarah hesitated. A part of her wanted to refuse, to run away, but she knew this meeting was necessary for both of them. It was no longer about revenge or retribution. Now, what remained was the chance to heal what was already broken. "Okay, Mom. Where should we meet?" Sarah said, her tone steadier than she felt. They agreed to meet at the local cafe, Maplewood Cafe, a simple and cozy place filled with wooden tables and the familiar aroma of hot coffee. When Sarah arrived, Kelly was already seated, gazing out the window. What surprised Sarah the most was how different her mother looked. Not just physically, her hair grayer, her hands more unsteady, but in her demeanor, her expression. There was a weight there, but also something lighter, as if Kelly had finally let go of a part of herself. Kelly looked at her with a small smile. "Hi, Sarah," she said softly, almost afraid to speak aloud. "Hi, Mom," Sarah replied, taking the seat across from her. Silence settled between them for a moment, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who finally had something to say but didn't know where to begin. "I know you've hated me for a long time, and I understand," Kelly began, her voice trembling. "I didn't know how to be the mother you needed. I pushed you too hard, demanded too much, and made you feel like you were never enough." Sarah took a deep breath, feeling the knot in her throat tighten with each word. Yet, at the same time, a sense of clarity was emerging within her. I always felt like I was wrong, like I was never good enough, like my only purpose was to please you. And that broke me, Mom. You broke me, I know," Kelly said, her voice now barely audible. "I can't change what I did, and I'll never be able to erase the pain I caused. But I want you to know, from the bottom of my heart, that it was never my intention. I was trapped in an idea of how things should be, of how you should be. But now, I realize that all you needed was love, acceptance, not expectations." The silence between them deepened, but it was no longer uncomfortable. It was a silence of mutual understanding, of both sides beginning to accept the pain, the disappointment, but also each other's flaws. Sarah didn't know if this was forgiveness, but it was, at least, the start of something new, and maybe that was enough for them. "I don't know if I can forgive everything all at once," Sarah said, looking at her mother. "I don't know if I can trust you like before, but I want to try, because, deep down, I know you love me." "I love you, sweetheart," Kelly said, holding Sarah's hands firmly. "And no matter how much I've failed, I will always love you. And I'll try to be the mother you deserve. I'll try to be the mother I should have been." At that moment, Kelly's words didn't feel empty. There was something in her gaze, something in her posture, that spoke louder than words. Sincerity, remorse, and most importantly, a genuine desire to change. Sarah stayed silent for a while. The pain was still there, but somehow, she felt she was beginning to release part of the burden she had carried. Forgiveness wouldn't come easily, but the intention was there, and with time, maybe she could let go of the anger, the sadness, the disappointment. Maybe their relationship would never be perfect, but perhaps it could be rebuilt brick by brick. I think this is what I needed to hear," Sarah said, her eyes welling up. "I won't lie, Mom. It won't be easy, but I can try." Kelly smiled, a genuine smile, tears glistening in her eyes. "I understand, sweetheart, and I'll be here for everything." As the coffee on the table grew cold between them, a new possibility emerged. Not a quick fix, not an instant cure, but an opportunity, a chance for Sarah to finally free herself from the expectations of a rigid, controlling mother, to allow herself to be who she truly was without fear of judgment. And at the same time, a chance for Kelly to redeem herself, to accept her failures, and to try from that moment on to be more than just a demanding mother. The meeting ended in silence, but a comfortable one, where words were no longer necessary. Sarah rose first, feeling a lightness she hadn't felt in years. Kelly followed, and before they parted, they embraced. It was the beginning of a new journey, not as mother and daughter in a perfect relationship, but as two people willing to grow, to learn, to accept their imperfections. And maybe, in the end, that would be enough to write a different story.